أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا إنه من يهدي الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلن تجد له وليا مرشدا والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Uh, Sorry, I have to get some clarifications. So many have joined and they want to know, I'm not aware that the language of the lecture will be Yoruba.
No, it's absolutely fine. It's absolutely fine. We can do it in English.
Okay. So
Yeah. So
for those
it's an
who are
inclusive.
asking, I think they will still be able to follow.
Yeah, inshallah. No, everybody speaks English anyway, so
Okay.
it's not a problem.
Okay. Because we have some non-Yoruba speaking who are here.
Audience, that's fine.
And we
That's
didn't
fine.
inform that. So
That's fine.
okay.
It's absolutely fine. Everybody is cool with English language being the medium of the presentation. It's fine. Please go ahead.
Okay, so Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. We give thanks to Almighty Allah for counting us among those who are witnessing this year's Ramadan. It is indeed a great privilege, which we must all be thankful to Allah for. So we pray that Allah give us the strength and opportunity to be among those that will benefit from the blessings of this month. Amen. Having said that, I want to thank the Jama'at Nasri Islam of the UK for this invitation. It's always my pleasure to have any opportunity to share some views on Waqf, which is an important aspect of Islam and Islamic law, which is not given so much a kind of recognition among so many Muslims, organizations, as well as even individuals. So today, this lecture, because of time constraint, we be focusing on the concept, then importance and innovative practices within its Muslim community in relation to Waqf. So I've divided the lecture into 5. Introduction, then I will talk about the conceptions of Waqf. What do we mean by Waqf when we talk of Waqf? Then we look at the importance of Waqf. Then I will talk about some innovative practices which have been employed in various parts of the world for development within the Muslim community before I make my conclusion. As we all know, one of the very beautiful uniqueness of Islam and Islamic law for that matter is that it is a comprehensive law which provides for all matter through its various sources. And that is why Allah says, "Ma farratna fil kitabi min shay'in," that we have not left anything in the book which has not been addressed. So whether directly or indirectly, and that is why we have the various sources of Islamic law: Quran, Sunnah, Ijma, Qiyas, and Ijtihad, which is a kind of umbrella techniques of deriving principles from Islamic law. So if the Quran does not expressly provide for certain things, then we can look for it in the Sunnah, or we can look for what the scholars, the jurists, or the companions of the Prophet agreed upon among themselves as far as that matter is concerned. Then we can also use what is called analogical deduction, which is a qiyas. Then qiyas is also part of ijtihad. Ijtihad is just a kind of reasoning, a kind of intellectual exercise that you make use of in order to derive principles on any matter. So that is how comprehensive and beautiful the provision of Islamic law is, that we cannot talk of anything without getting the specific rulings on it from Islamic law. So incidentally and very, very fortunately for us, Waqf is said to be an ijtihadi product of Islamic law. That is, there is no direct provisions on Waqf in the Quran. Neither is it even there in the Sunnah. But it is through the exercise of ijtihad that certain verses of the Quran have been relied upon, and certain ahadiths of the Prophet have also been explored in order to come up with various principles of Waqf. So Waqf, as we know, of course, is an Arabic terminology which can be simply translated as endowment in English language. But endowment, even from the English or Western perspective, does not comprehensively connote what Waqf means. And that is why we can just say Waqf is Islamic endowment system. We understand what an endowment is from the English perspective. But the English endowment system is not the same as Islamic endowment system. So the Islamic provisions on endowment is what Waqf connotes. So when we understand this, we must also understand that Waqf is not trust. In Islamic law, we have trust, which is called al-amana. So Waqf is not essentially al-amana as some people will want to look at it, even though there is element of trust in it for its proper management. But you cannot equate it with al-amana. So the same thing, you cannot take Waqf to mean what is conceived as trust in an English sense. I'm happy that the audience are majorly from the UK, and I believe everyone will be familiar with the trust system in that part of the world. So some people will want to see or think that trust is the same as Waqf or the Islamic version of a Waqf. They are totally different. Even among the scholars, there are a lot of differences between Waqf and trust. But because of focus, I will not be able to delve into that. So simply put, Waqf is the act of surrendering the ownership of any useful property. So here, we emphasize useful property. What matters is that you have a property that belongs to you, and is it capable of being used or being useful to any other person? So once any property is useful, it is capable of being made as Waqf, regardless of its nature. Once it is something that is acceptable and recognized as a property in Islamic law, it can be used as a Waqf. Let me give a very practical example on this. During one of my research field works, I was in Zamfara State. I was in the course of being introduced, getting exposed to some of the Waqf that have been made in that part of the world. I was shown an Islamic traditional slate, which is usually called Walaha, where somebody used his own hand to write the whole of Surah to Yasin, and now donated it to the Waqf Commission in Zamfara State as Waqf, saying that he required that they should be making it available for people to read, and as long as they are reading it, he will be getting the reward. So we can see that what he has done can be useful for some people, and that is why it's not until when you have certain treasures before you can do Waqf. Once you have any property that can be useful for anybody, then it is capable of being made as a Waqf. A good example is some of the books and people we have at home, which they have abandoned because they have passed that level. So such book can be donated to certain schools for the use of a student, and that will be a kind of a benefit to them, which we in return bring reward to the donor. So any property that is useful can be made as Waqf. And the aim of the Waqf is essentially to get reward from Allah. It's not for show off. It's not for people to know that you are generous or for you to keep the memory of certain deceased person or whatever. Even if you do Waqf in favor of a deceased person, it's for that person to be getting reward of the use of that Waqf property, unlike some other endowment system. So in terms of conception, the jurists have different understanding of what Waqf is in terms of ownership. And we have these differences between Abu Hanifa and the majority of schools consisting of Hanafi, the Shafi'i, and the Hanbali school. Then, on the other hand, there's also another view from the Maliki school. So, to the Abu Hanifa, the ownership of Waqf property after it's been made is still believed to belong to the donor, so much that at any point in time, he can rescind or revoke the Waqf he has made. And as we are going to see, that one will go into the bindingness of the Waqf when made, according to the Abu Hanifa. Then to the majority, once you have made any property as Waqf, you have transferred ownership to Allah. And once a property becomes that of Allah, you don't have any authority to exercise your right of ownership upon it any longer. And the similar view is shared by Maliki with Abu Hanifa, except that to them, the Waqf ownership, even though is still with the donor, but it's he no longer has the power to exercise a right of ownership on it. It just recognized that he has that ownership still vested in him, just for the purpose of amending the provisions and terms of a Waqf. But to the majority, once you have made a property as Waqf, it is transferred to Allah. But in most jurisdictions, the view that is held is that once you have made a Waqf, a property as Waqf, is no longer yours, and the ownership has been transferred to Allah. Even under some of the Waqf laws in Nigeria, the same thing also applies. Then in terms of bindingness, that is, if you make Waqf, you declare a Waqf, do you have the right to go back and revoke it? Abu Hanifa said it's not binding, that you can revoke your Waqf at any time. While the majority said you cannot revoke because it is binding, and the Maliki said you can revoke within 1 year, but not forever. And you can also revoke it if you make such a Waqf to be temporary, as we are going to see that we have different types of Waqf. Then it's also discussed that is it required that the donor must surrender the Waqf property before it will become binding and valid? So the Abu Hanifa said no, while the majority said yes, you have to surrender the Waqf, the Hanafi school, while others said you don't need to surrender. For instance, if somebody is outside Nigeria and you have a property in Nigeria and you want to make such a property as Waqf, if you don't have the opportunity to come to Nigeria, immediately after you have made that Waqf, you have declared that property as Waqf, it becomes valid according to the majority. Why the Abu Hanifa is saying that until when you hand over to the Mutawalli, that is the Waqf manager. But to the Maliki, they said that yes, you need to surrender, but what it requires is that within that, after you have transferred the property to the manager, it must remain with that manager within 1 year without taking it back for it to become binding, like we have said. So these are some of the differences between them. And that one also goes to the argument whether Waqf must be permanent or you can do a temporary Waqf. So it is the Maliki school that says the Waqf can be permanent or it can be temporary. For instance, somebody can make a Waqf of fund for the sponsorship of the education of certain orphans, with the hope that after a certain period of time, like 10 years, it's going to get back the fund. So this is possible under the Maliki school. And of course, they have also talked about use different terminologies to refer to Waqf, and with different, even the pillars of Waqf, they have used different terminology. It's only the Maliki school that have used some kind of specific terminology different from what others have used. So generally, it's Waqf is the Waqf, the Islamic endowment system itself is called Al-Waqf, like we have said. While to the Maliki, they call it Al-Hubsu or Al-Tahbis. And that is why you want to read the Maliki school literature, you will see them discussing Waqf under the title of Al-Hubsu or Al-Tahbis. For instance, if you look at one of their popular books, which is called the book of written by the Imam Maliki himself, so they use Al-Tahbis or Al-Hubsu. Then the Waqif, that is the Waqf donor, is called Al-Waqif. Why to the Maliki school, they call it Al-Muhabbisu. And the Mawquf, that is the property made as Waqf itself, is called Al-Mawquf. And the Maliki refer to it as Al-Muhabbasu. And the beneficiary, the Waqf beneficiary, is called Al-Mawquf alayhi, and to them, they refer to him as Al-Muhabbasu alayhi. Why the terms, the legal terminologies that will express the Waqf is called Asiga, which in the modern time is encouraged to be in written form, which will be in form of a Waqf deed. And that is why if you do Waqf and you don't have a deed, you have not completed the required pillar. You must have a deed spelling out the terms and conditions of that Waqf. And that is what is called Al-Waqfiyya or Dusturul Waqf. So these are some of the terminology that we may be coming across when we are discussing the Waqf concept. Then there are different types of Waqf which can be done. This depends on different factors that we may want to look at. Based on the Waqf property itself, Waqf can be in form of immovable Waqf, that is Waqf of landed property, or something that is stationary, which will be on the spot where it is, like Waqf of mosque, Waqf of shopping mall, Waqf of housing estate for the travelers, for the orphans, and so on and so forth. So this is called immovable Waqf, Waqf Iqar. Then we have Gairu Iqar, that is movable Waqf, such as a Waqf Nuqud, that is cash Waqf. And in terms of the donors, we can have Waqf Jima'i, that is group Waqf. So in essence, it's not required that you must alone be the one to do any Waqf. You can come together as a group to do Waqf. For instance, if you want to do Waqf of water provision for certain community, so one or more people can come together and contribute in order to do such a Waqf. That is a group Waqf. And of course, we have individual Waqf. Then we have state Waqf and non-state Waqf, Muslim Waqf. Then there are also arguments whether non-Muslim can also do Waqf. And of course, we have foreign Waqf. For instance, there are some foreign agencies, foreigners who have made some Waqf in Nigeria. So such will be regarded as a foreign Waqf. Then we have domestic Waqf as well. And there's also what is called inheritance Waqf. So this is very useful for heirs who inherit their deceased ones, and they feel that they are comfortable enough that they don't need the inheritance property. Instead of wasting away the property, you can convert it into Waqf. That is very, very allowed. And this is one of the ways we can guide against wastage of inheritance properties, because you can actually convert your inheritance into Waqf. And this will even be encouraged for heirs who are inheriting their parents. So if your parent did not have the opportunity of even doing any Waqf for him or herself, whatever you inherit from him or her, you can decide to make some of them as a Waqf for the purpose of accruing some reward to the deceased parent. Then, of course, we have, in terms of beneficiaries, Waqf can be in form of Waqf Khairi, which is a kind of Waqf for the benefit of general people. You don't designate or specify who will be the beneficiary. So, for instance, if you do Waqf for the benefit of widows, so any widow will be entitled to benefit from such a Waqf. Then we have Waqf Hali, which is called family Waqf. So you can do a Waqf for the benefit of the members of your family. So even from this, we can begin to see the importance of a Waqf. For instance, those who are abroad, from time to time, your family relative at home, they will be sending to you requesting for this and that, so much that one can be overwhelmed at times. So in order to safeguard against this constant, the burden of this constant request, it's not that they will not request, but for your own benefit, for proper planning, one can decide to do a kind of Waqf for them. For instance, you can build a shopping mall and dedicate it to them, that whatever rent that is coming from it would be to meet their demand and request. So this is one of the benefits we can get from a Waqf, as we are going to see later. Then, based on the duration of Waqf, like we have said, Waqf can be temporary or it can be permanent. So this is called Waqf Mu'akkad and Waqf Mu'abbad. So it depends on the duration. You can decide to do a Waqf of 10 years, Waqf of 20 years, Waqf of 10 years, or Waqf till the time of one's death, so that after one's death, the heirs can inherit such a property. Then in terms of management system, we have public Waqf as we have private Waqf. Private Waqf can be corporate Waqf as well as a personal Waqf. The private Waqf is, corporate Waqf is when you register a body for the purpose of managing Waqf, your Waqf property for you, or you make your Waqf available for management with a particular registered organization which is involved in Waqf management. So we can see this, that so many bodies are registered with the Corporate Affairs Commission in Nigeria. So this is a way of private Waqf. Then personal Waqf is when you appoint your own trusted individuals as your Waqf managers. So this is also allowed. Then in terms of contractual structuring of your Waqf, Waqf can be unilateral Waqf or mutual Waqf, because there's argument about among scholars whether Waqf as a contract requires acceptance, or is only the offer that will make it binding and valid. So there are some Waqf, if it is in form of Waqf Khairi, then it can be unilateral Waqf. But if it is Waqf Hali, some scholars said that it is a mutual Waqf. The beneficiaries must express their acceptance before the Waqf will be valid. Then in terms of legal consequences, Your Waqf can be binding or non-binding. And we also have some Waqf that are called the Waqf. That is by presumption of law. Once you do such Waqf, if whether you declare it to be Waqf or not, the law presumes it to be Waqf. For instance, if you build mosque, not the type of mosque that people build inside their compound. We mean mosque because the one they build inside their compound is not mosque. It's just a musalla, a place for the dedicated for prayer. But in terms of mosque, it must be open to everybody, to the public. So if you build mosque without even declaring it as Waqf, it automatically becomes a Waqf. So likewise, if we provide water and you make such water to be accessible and controlled by the public, then it is also regarded as a Waqf, even if you don't declare it as such. So why we have de facto Waqf, that is certain Waqf that, if done, will not be taken to be Waqf until when we can get facts to establish that what was done was actually Waqf. So I hope I'm being followed.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So
Yes.
quickly, let me proceed to the importance of a Waqf. I know we don't have so much time, so I've also tried to summarize everything. So we have, I'm going to look at three main importance of a Waqf. The first one is religious importance. Waqf is one of the very, very religious instrument in Islamic law that achieve for us tazkiyah al-qalb, that is spiritual purification of the heart. Because one of the things that will make one to decide to do Waqf is when you remember death, constant remembrance of death, and you try to prepare for it. Because like the Prophet said, once one dies, every good act will come to an end, except in three circumstances. And one of these is what is called Sadaqatu Jariyah, and which is what Waqf connotes. So Waqf is very important that it makes us to have tazkiyah to qalb. That is, we try to purify our heart by not holding so much to whatever that we have acquired. We try to make it circulate to others. And we also make provision that after our death, how are we going to still be able to get reward from Allah? So that is one of the religious importance of Waqf. Then Waqf also ensure realization of Maqasid Sharia, that is objectives of Islamic law. There are 5 major objectives of Islamic law. We have the protection of religion, protection of life, protection of property, protection of intellect, and protection of family. So in all of these, if one wants to promote any of the objectives of Islamic law, Waqf is very handy for us. If you want to protect the religion of Allah, support the religion of Allah, one of the best ways to do this is for you to do a Waqf. For instance, you can make a Waqf and declare that whatever benefit that comes from it should be to sponsor da'wah activities. So in that regard, you'll be promoting religious objective of Islamic law. Then you can do Waqf for the protection of life. For instance, those who are sick, they need their life to be protected. So one can do a Waqf and make the benefit to go to the sick. Or one can even do Waqf of a hospital, as we are going to see, which is one of the innovative practices in the Muslim community. Then another religious importance of Waqf is investment for posthumous rewards. As we do invest in this world for the rainy days, so one of the best way we can also invest for our hereafter, for us to have rewards still going to us in our graves, is by doing Waqf. And this is what is called Sadaqatu Jariyah. So anybody that desire to be having reward after death will definitely go into Waqf. And more importantly, if we want to perfect our religious, our good deeds, that we want our good deed to be better perfected, as Allah said in Quran 3 verse 93, that لَن تَنَالُوا الْبِرَّ حَتَّى تُنْفِقُوا مِمَّا تُحِبُّونَ, that you can never complete your act of good deed except you spend from out of what Allah has bestowed on you. So one of the best way to perfect our good deed is to engage in Waqf, and this is a religious importance for us. Then social importance. Waqf is an instrument for Islamic social for Islamic social finance product for social needs. If you are thinking of imparting on people in a way that you will also safeguard your wealth without being extravagant, one of the ways you can do that is for you to do Waqf to meet that purpose. For instance, if one desire that one would like to be making food provision for people, so you can do Waqf towards realizing this objective, this social objective. Then Waqf also give us the opportunity to have long-term plan for social impact. If we don't want to be doing impact like politicians usually do, that they will say they are doing empowerment, this and that, intermittently, that they will only do usually when election is approaching, and they will not be able to continue even after the expiration of their tenure of office. So if you don't want to be like that, if you are looking forward towards doing a kind of long-term plan for social impact, the best way for us is to go by way of Waqf. So anybody that desired this kind of social impact that will be long and lasting, then Waqf is the option. Then Waqf is a tool for social crisis and risk management. Recently in Turkey, we experienced some kind of earthquakes. So Waqf could be done to safeguard, to provide that if there is natural disaster, a force majeure, unexpected occurrences, if it happens, we can do Waqf to cater for that. Like within our Muslim community, we can have a Waqf that is meant to be a kind of immediate relief for a widow in case any member of the community dies, or for the orphan, pending when they will be able to stabilize. So this is kind of importance which Waqf can serve for us. Then Waqf is open for constant and continuous social support in all forms. There is no time one can not do Waqf. One can do Waqf anytime, any day of the year, and one can do Waqf with any type of property that can be useful to people, unlike Zakah, which has its own stipulated principle. Then Waqf also give us the opportunity to make provision for estate preservation of estate for generation. If you desire that certain property which you have acquired should be preserved for a long time within your family, so to say, so Waqf can also be adopted to do this, because there will be some property or even a business setup that you don't want to be disrupted after death. So one of the ways by which you can preserve such property is by employing the use of Waqf. And of course, a lot of economic importance of Waqf. One of it is wealth distribution. Then Waqf also serve as a kind of job creation and career opportunities. So if somebody decides that he wants to do something that will create job for people and as well also bringing some kind of a reward to him from Allah, Waqf is a very good option for this. Because a lot of jobs and activities, there is no way you establish Waqf without at least recruiting 3-5 people to be involved as employees. So if you desire to create job or even give opportunities to people to have some kind of career opportunity, so Waqf is a very good approach in that regard. Then even business financing. If we have startup people looking for those that will finance their businesses, support them. So Waqf is also one of the ways by which we can do this, and that is a kind of economic importance. Then it is effective for generational estate preservation, like you have said. So this also part of the economic importance of Waqf. Then it is affordable for estate planning. If you want to plan your estate, for instance, we all know that once one dies as a Muslim, you no longer have control over your property. But if you desire that certain properties of yours should be managed in a particular way after your death, you can employ Waqf in order to do this planning. If you want that certain property should not be inherited until a certain period of time, then you can use Waqf to make it a kind of a temporary Waqf. So that is why it is a kind of a estate planning for us. Then it safeguards against extravagancy in spendings. Some people have a kind of a sincere and genuine intention to impart and make some kind of a religious contribution. But such contribution eventually becomes burdensome on them because it becomes constant and they become the only circle of people that people go to from time to time. For instance, some people have the habit of sending people on pilgrimage, whether on Hajj or Umrah. So from year in, year out, they spend a lot of amount of money. So in order to avoid this kind of a burden, financial burden, you can do Waqf, a one-time Waqf, and decide that whatever that is coming in from your Waqf will be what will be spent on that purpose, rather than you now mopping your fund here and there every year in order to meet that objective. So you can have a kind of a Hajj and Umrah Waqf, so much that whatever that is coming from that property, Waqf property, will be what will be tailored towards sponsoring people on Hajj and Umrah. So, and finally, I'll just mention some of the notable innovations which we can have in our community as it has been practiced in some parts of the world. One of them is a kitchen Waqf. We all might have heard of a food bank in some parts of the world. This is also a very good innovation that we can use Waqf to have within our community. Because like the Yoruba will say that if you remove starving, that is hunger from your situation, I think every other thing is minor. So we can cater for our feeding need by having a kind of a kitchen Waqf within our community, so that at any time that people need some kind of food, they will go to that kitchen Waqf if they genuinely need the food, so that from time to time we'll be having food available in that kitchen. This was done during the Ottoman Empire, that you'll be seeing Waqf kitchen here and there. If you are, because as a Muslim that is well-bred, that is well-trained, you will not ordinarily want to beg for food. So it is believed that any Muslim that we need food, we beg for food, we actually be in need of that food. So in order to cater, and anybody can be in that situation at any time. So in order to cater for that need, we can have kitchen Waqf within our community that will cater for our feeding need. Then cash Waqf, we can do Waqf of money, dedicating certain amount of money, making money available for the purpose of catering for certain needs of our members of our community. And this cash Waqf is expected either to be used as interest-free loan among members of the community, or we invest it and the proceeds of the investment will now be used to cater for the needs of our members. And of course, we can also have what is called Waqf cash. That is, we have a particular project which we want to make as Waqf. We can make funds available for that. For instance, water Waqf or Waqf hospital. So in our Muslim community, we can work towards having water Waqf so that the problem of water scarcity among members of that community will be adequately addressed. Then, of course, we can also have contingency or emergency Waqf. We should have Waqf, which is meant to cater for unforeseen circumstances, like when natural disasters occur, rainstorm, windstorm, and all that, destroying people's houses. So these are some of the things that we can do, which has been part of the innovative practices in many parts of the world. Then cooperative Waqf. We can have a cooperative society where we will have certain funds set aside as Waqf to cater for the needs of a member. For instance, to give them free interest-free loan, or for the purpose of empowerment, or to support the sick members of the cooperative. And of course, there's also the innovation of having Waqf of service in a kind of community service Waqf, that different professionals, everybody will contribute their services towards realizing certain Waqf objectives for the community. So this is also very well practiced in many parts of the world. And there's also tree Waqf or green Waqf. So we can do Waqf of planting trees within our community so that we will have better fresh air to breathe in. So on this note, I want to recommend that there is need for every mosque to have a kind of Waqf fund within their mosque activities, so that every member of the mosque will be contributing to the Waqf. The Muslim community Waqf pool, where we have a Muslim community, it may be a group of landlords who have met and they happen to be Muslim. So every Muslim community should have a kind of a Waqf pool, which will be mandatory contribution. Some writers have suggested that we can look at the model of the practice in Malaysia, where they have what is called a sinking fund for their structured management system. So it's something we can look at, how they make that sinking fund a kind of compulsory for all members of the community of the structure building. So in every community, Muslim community, we should also have Muslim community Waqf pool that will be mandatory for every member to cater for our need. And of course, the organizers of this lecture, which is JNI of the UK, so I also recommend that the JNI should also look towards having their own JNI UK Waqf to cater for a lot of the needs of the members. And I also appeal that Muslim salary earners should personally make a kind of a monthly salary deduction Waqf, which I call SD Waqf, and they will indicate who are the beneficiaries, whether the orphan, the sick, and so on and so forth. So, and also there is need for us to introduce Baitul Mal scheme in Muslim communities. This is a kind of legacy that we have lost. If you have Baitul Mal, a lot of things we'll be able to do through Waqf. So we need to to renew our advocacy on the need for Baitul Mal in various Muslim communities, because Baitul Mal will be the one to keep, to house Waqf, to house Zakah, Sadaqah, and so on and so forth. So if you have Baitul Mal, we will be able to better take the advantage of Waqf for development within the Muslim community. So in conclusion, we can say there are great potentials in Waqf not yet explored. And unfortunately, as an ijtihadi product of Islamic law, Waqf is open to wide innovations, because in matters of mu'amalat, the issue of bid'ah is not applicable. The only thing we can talk about is halal or haram, and Waqf is halal. So we can do a lot of innovative things in relation to Waqf. So Waqf is considered the third realm sector for development in Muslim communities. So this was done especially during the Ottoman Empire, that somebody would have been born in a Waqf hospital, and he would have been raised with a Waqf fund. He will work in a Waqf establishment, and when he dies, he would have been shrouded with a Waqf cloth, and he will also be buried in a cemetery, which is also a Waqf. So he will live the whole circle of his life being supported by Waqf. So this is also still possible in our Muslim community. So Waqf has religious, social, and economic importance, which makes it unique. The Sokoto's state zakat, which has been passed, is a model for us in Nigeria in order to move our Waqf forward. So all mosques can be better impactful socially and economically on their congregations through Waqf. Mosque is not a center for religious matters alone. We can also use the platform of mosque to promote our social and economic needs, and this can be done through the use of a Waqf. So Waqf is available for product design to address development needs of Muslim community. So all done with Waqf, desired development is capable in Muslim community, bi-idhnillah. So I thank everybody for your attention, and I pray Allah make this beneficial for all of us. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you very much, Dr. Ishola. We truly appreciate your presentation, and it is not only eye-opening, it is equally very, very educative. And we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to continue to enrich you in knowledge. Amen. We pray that Allah's mercy will continue to abide upon your life. And we pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will grant you long life. Amen. And will reward you in the hereafter with Al-Jannah al-Firdaus. Thank you so much. However, having said that, we have some questions here that I would like us to entertain, because this is a learning process. And what we emphasize in Jama'at Nasri al-Islam, even though our missions are just three, we focus on dawah, we focus on charitable services, and we focus on, humanity. However, as part of our dawah, we ensure that education is something, continuous education of Muslims is something that is of a highest priority to us. So in the light of this, we have some questions that will be, I believe very strongly that some of them have been touched in the course of your presentation, but I still want you to briefly, touch on some of them and equally elaborate on the others. First and foremost, there is a question here which reads, what is the distinction between Waqf and Sadaqatu Jariyah? I know you mentioned this, but if you could kindly make a very brief, a repeat of your explanation on it. That would be quite helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Sadaqatul Jariyah mentioned in the hadith, like I've said, that there is no direct provision in the Quran on the Sunnah Waqf. So one of the hadith used to develop the principles of Waqf is the hadith on Sadaqatul Jariyah, that is perpetual charity. Charity that when you do is going to be preserved and continue to generate benefit to people. And that is what is interpreted as Al-Waqf. So Waqf is Sadaqatul Jariyah, and Sadaqatul Jariyah is Waqf.
Thank you very much for that question. Another question. Another question is, pardon me, I'm scrolling to get them through. Okay, there's another question here. That do you encourage one to use one zakat to make provisions as Waqf?
Do you what?
Hello?
Yes, I'm listening.
Yes, the question is, do you encourage one to use its zakat, as a provision for Waqf?
No, zakat has a clear provision on the beneficiaries. So if you are doing your zakat, you will pay it as stipulated in the Quran. But the only there are issues whether you can also, if you do your Waqf, whether you will also be required to pay zakat on Waqf. So some scholars say if it is Waqf Khairi, which is for the benefit of the general, so you don't need to pay zakat on it. But if it is Waqf Hali, that is specifically made for some people, so the beneficiaries will be required to make to pay zakat on it. But you cannot use your own zakat and now decide to convert it to Waqf, because that zakat does not belong to you. And one of the requirements of a valid Waqf is that you must do Waqf only with your own property and not property of another person.
Thank you very much. Another question is this. Can Waqf be interpreted as foundation? We are quite familiar with the concept of foundation. So are they the same?
Yeah, that is what I've said, that trust foundation and others foundation. So they are not Waqf because they are operating under two different legal systems. Foundation is operated under the common law principle, and they have the laws and everything that regulates them. Let me give a clear example of what is done in Nigeria. Like I've said, people register foundation in Nigeria, but the law, Companies and Allied Matters Act, stipulates that once you registered any foundation, whatever property, hello? Please,
yes.
Can we mute others?
Yes, please carry on. Thank you.
Okay, so that if you registered a registered trustee now, which is what is done in Nigeria as a foundation, that foundation itself has its own personal personality,
legal entity,
different from even the trustee, and different even from the funders. So now the law stipulates that whatever property that is acquired in the name of that foundation belongs to that foundation. And in the case of the winding up of that foundation, that property will be transferred to any other similar foundation with a similar objective. So we can see the consequence of foundation is different from the consequences of Al-Waqf. And that is why, to me, from the legal perspective, I do advocate that we can only presume that people that are registering Waqf with CAC in Nigeria as foundation are doing so under Dorura, that they don't have option now. But the good news is that there is a new development in Sokoto State. They have just passed the new Waqf law, providing for registration of Waqf with the Waqf Commission. So that one will make it more, it will make it neater and clearer without a kind of a legal conflict of law issues in it. So foundation is not the same as Waqf. And even whatever foundation you register, the highest that could be taken to be from the Waqf perspective is that it will be a Waqf manager. But the question is that how do you want to transfer your Waqf to that foundation without losing its status as a Waqf? So this is one of the challenges there.
Okay, thank you very much. And another question is this. Is there a distinction between cash Waqf and Waqf cash?
Yes, there is a distinction between them. And is one is what we call monetized Waqf, and the other one is called a monetary Waqf. Monetary Waqf, that is a Waqf that the subject, the mawquf itself, is money. That is cash Waqf. That is, you make Waqf of a certain amount of money. That is the mawquf. And the requirement is that whatever that is made as Waqf cannot be inherited, cannot be disposed of. You must always preserve it. So whatever amount of money that is made as Waqf under the cash Waqf, that is monetary Waqf, must be preserved by investing it, and whatever increment that comes from it, you'll be using it to cater for the needs of the beneficiaries. Or you make such fund available and circulate it as a free interest, interest-free loans. So these are the two uses you can make of a monetary Waqf, that is cash Waqf. But for Waqf cash, that is monetized Waqf. For instance, they need water somewhere. You cannot take water to that community and make it as Waqf for them. You will have to use money in order to get that water available. So when you make money available for the purpose of realizing a particular Waqf project, that is what we call a monetized Waqf, a kind of a Waqf cash. I hope that is clear.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe so. It's quite clear, very simple. Thank you very much for your time. At this point, there is no other question, and I cannot see any hand up. So in view of this, I want to say, okay, we have a hand up. Aminat. Aminat. Yeah, please unmute to speak.
Mute. Okay. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
May Almighty Allah reward our doctor, and may you reward the organizers of the program also. Two things I want to say. One is like a comment, especially for those of us living in the West. I think one of the Waqf that we can invest in is like having a cemetery or having a kind of fund for if any Muslim die. I don't know what the procedure is in the UK, but here in Ireland, when people die, when Muslims die, it's quite a problem, because it's quite a challenge, because people will they have to start donating money, because it is hard to find a place to bury them because of the kind of society where we live in. So I believe that that will be a good a Waqf to consider in the West. Yeah. And secondly, my question to our doctor is, if I have some books and I think these books will be beneficial to others and I want to donate it, let's say to a library, is there a procedure to follow, or I just make my intention and I just give it out? Is there a procedure to follow Islamic like that? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sister Aminat, for the question and the contribution.
Thank you so much. I'm happy for this feedback, and I think, believe firmly that those of you who are abroad, you have been able to identify what Waqf can do for you. This is exactly what we refer to as a kind of a contingency Waqf. Because people do think that when we talk of Waqf, it's just about building mosques and here and there. No, and that's why we have talked about is the social importance. Because if like the situation over there you mentioned, the best way is for you Muslim concerned to come together and make sure you float a Waqf that will be for the purpose of catering for such needs among yourselves. Then for the Waqf of books, for Waqf, like we said, it is required that you make it clear to them that it is Waqf. And you stipulate, because there is a requirement that there should be a kind of constant periodic inspection of Waqf, so that we be sure that the Waqf itself is giving the benefit expected. Because if we have a redundant Waqf, there are some Waqf that people do it, and after they die, it doesn't benefit anybody. And if it doesn't bring any benefit, then it's not going to bring any reward to anybody. Because what the Prophet said is Sadaqatu Jariyah, that is perpetual charity, that is bringing reward, that is being used by people. So the more they use your Waqf, the more the reward that will be going to you. So if you want to do Waqf of a book, for instance, it is better that you ensure that you give instruction in your Waqfiyah, that is the Waqf deed, to whatever library or organization you want to give the books to, that you require that the books should be placed on shelves where students or the users will be making reference to it from time to time. And it was also good that one makes a Waqf of what people need in that school or organization, so that it will be a book that people will always make reference to from time to time. So this is the best way to go about it in order for one to have the benefit of Waqf that is done.
Thank you very much. I believe very much that the question has been well answered, Sister Aminat. I don't know if there's any gray area you would like clarification on, or otherwise we can proceed to the next person. Okay. Okay, thank you so much, Sister Aminat. Yeah. Yes, we have another question coming from Brother Taiwo Mutiu Atonda. Please go for it.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you for the organization of this event. May Allah reward all the contributors immensely.
Amen.
My question relates to the kitchen Waqf. That kitchen Waqf, according to doctor, that it will serve as a food bank to the needy in the community. So my question relating to that is that how do we continue replenishment of food in this bank? Who are going to be the donor? And does that has to do with one, the Waqf which he has mentioned, either the Waqf cash, in such a way that it will now be the cash to be used to be buying food into the kitchen, or how do we ensure the sustainability of this kitchen even after the death of maybe the donor of the Waqf? Thank you very much.
Thank you. You can kindly put down your hands.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me quickly make this clarification. There is difference between Waqf and Sadaqah. And that is why, even in the discussion of Sadaqah among the scholars, Sadaqah to Jariyah is different from the other forms of sadaqat. So now, any provision you make that will lead to immediate consumption of what you have made available is not waqf. So when we are talking of a kitchen waqf, it's not, it doesn't mean that you will be making food available and people will be going there to collect that food and you will say you have done your, you have done kitchen waqf. We are talking of a well-organized arrangement where people will deliberately put up a kitchen for the purpose of making food available. The way they can do this is, for instance, they may first try to build a location or somewhere that will be that kitchen. That building itself will be waqf. That's number one. Then number two, they will now look at what and how will income continue to be generated in order to service that kitchen. So that will be another level of a waqf. And that's why we even have what we call al-waqfu al-waqfi, that is waqf for the benefit of waqf. This is one of the mistakes that people make. Some people will do waqf of mosque. They will now make that mosque to become a burden to the beneficiary. And that's why we see some mosques, when they are built, they will look very beautiful. But after some few years, the mosque will become dilapidated because there's no renovation. So when you do
there's no maintenance provision.
Yes, there's no maintenance. When you do waqf, it is required that any waqf that cannot itself be generating fund, you must have another waqf that will be serving that waqf. So the kitchen waqf we are talking about is going to be a kind of 3-layer waqf structure. The kitchen itself is waqf, but what will be supplying it in order to service it as income will be another waqf, another waqf to be made available. And that one will be called waqf of waqf, al-waqf al-waqfi. So it is something that we have to be structured properly if we desire to have such. Not that we just, okay, we have opened a waqf, a kitchen waqf, so everybody should be bringing food. Then if you need food, come and take that food. If they are taking that food, that they are consuming it, so that is not waqf. It will just be the sadaqah.
Thank you very much. I believe this is another very clear explanation to all of us. I cannot see any other hand up or any interest or clarification. Okay. Okay, Dr. Abdullahi Ibrahim Salahuddin, please go for it. You can unmute. You can unmute and go for your question, please.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
I must commend the efforts of the organizers of this interesting lecture, as well as our presenter, that is Dr. Abdullahi Ishola. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continue to be with every one of us.
Amen.
My kind of contribution is a kind of, I don't know how to put it. Is it to say comment on what Doctor has just said on the issue of waqf? I think waqf, to the best of my understanding, has a lot to do with the intention of the donor of the waqf, the person who is endowing. We have long-time waqf and we have short-time waqf. Whoever donates with the intention of waqf is also to be counted as a waqf, depending on his intention. If he intends that what he donates is for sadaqah, that is to be taken as such. And if he consider it that this is waqf, although it does not generate, but for that specific time, it takes care of a certain needs of certain people. That is where I want us to ponder on it and still give it a kind of second thought on the technicality of the word waqf. Although Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said that the waqf has to be a generating waqf. That is why there is difference between a generating waqf. Although the root of the waqf is an endowment that it is actually initially as an endowment and is subsequently generating benefits to other beneficiaries. So in conclusion, I have to commend the effort of our able doctor. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continue to be with every one of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abdullahi. I've actually been looking to get your contact. Kindly get in touch with me. I don't know how you got the link, but you can kindly get in touch with me, through the same link, the number that sent out the link, please. I like to have a word with you. Myself and Dr. Abdullahi Ibrahim, we were both classmates in the university back in those days. Alhamdulillah. Inshallah, we'll get in touch. I will leave the room open for Dr. Ishola to please give his contribution to that. So I think it's just an addition to what he has said anyway, but I don't know if he has any reply.
Thank you very much, Doctor. May Allah continue to reward you. I understand the aspect, the angle is trying to come from. But let me say this, that this is one of the areas which we need to understand what actually makes waqf to be different from sadaqah. You see, there are three areas where people get things confused when it comes to waqf. One of them is the issue of sadaqah to jariyah, and waqf, like we have said. But the scholars have settled that what the Prophet referred to as sadaqah to jariyah in that hadith is what has been explored and developed as waqf. That one is clear. Now, the issue of sadaqah and waqf now, or we say sadaqah and sadaqah to jariyah, in fact, there is a kind of intellectual engagement among the scholars of waqf on whether there is need for you to have the niyyah, the intention of saying, I want to do waqf, before your waqf will be regarded as waqf. In essence, they opine that is it a kind of implied intention that will be taken, that what you have done, is it what will determine whether what you have done is waqf or not? And that's why, like I mentioned, under the types of waqf, there are some things that when you do them, whether you even have that intention that you want to do waqf or not, they are considered to be waqf. And that is like the provision of makbara, cemetery, provision of water, building of mosque. All this, once you do it in a way that people have control and they have unhidden assets to them, then it is considered as a waqf. But one major thing that differentiates sadaqah from waqf, why the issue of mere intention will not be enough, is that waqf is a well-structured institution. And that is why we have the Arkanul Waqfi, which is what we call the pillars of waqf. I will give an analogy. This is Ramadan. We have some non-Muslims that are genuinely feeling that they too will not even be comfortable eating in this month of Ramadan. But because we have Arkanul Islam, which they have not fulfilled, so whatever they are doing, that's why their intention is not going to be valid. So the same thing, Waqf is not just about intention. It is a structured institution. It has its pillars, which are also mentioned in the presentation. The first pillar is Al-Mawquf, Al-Waqif, the donor himself. So there are some people that cannot be donors of Waqf, even if they so desire. Then we have Al-Mawquf, the Waqf property itself. There are some properties that cannot be made as Waqf, even if one thinks so. An example is perishable items. You cannot make a perishable item as Waqf and say because maybe there's a earthquake somewhere and they need emergency, you are not sending some items to them that may even last longer. For instance, you are sending beddings and all that to them, which they can use for a long time. That one cannot be Waqf, because Waqf itself, the Mawquf must be preserved. The benefit is what will now be made available for ownership by the beneficiary. Then we have the Siga, even the terms expression that have to be used before you can be taken to have validly done a Waqf is another thing. So it goes beyond just mere intention that, okay, we are sending items to them in Turkey because they have earthquake, and I'm having the intention that what I'm sending it as Waqf. That may not be, except if it's something that can actually be a Waqf in its form. For instance, if we sell Quran to them, which we know that will for a long time be used by them, then it can be taken to be Waqf, but not just because it's catering for the need of people at a particular time that will make it to be Waqf. So we have clear pillars that must be well established. In fact, the modern scholars of Waqf have added a fifth pillar of Waqf, and that is the requirement for the Mutawali or Nazirul Waqf. That is the Waqf manager, that you must appoint a manager for your Waqf. And that is why in some countries like Malaysia, they already have official managers for all the Waqf. So that pillar is already catered for. Because if you do your Waqf and you don't have managers for it, then your Waqf will not be taken to be Waqf. So Waqf is not something that the beneficiaries will take control of. There must be somebody that will be managing it, and there must be a periodic inspection to ensure that that property continue to produce benefit and is preserved. And that is why inalienability, perpetuity, and perpetuity is one of part of the legal consequences of Waqf. That is, it must be perpetual. It must not be something that can be inherited. It must not be something that can be sold. It must not be something that can be used as mortgage. So there are a lot of Sharia constraints on Waqf, which may make it to go just beyond the intention that, okay, I'm intending that what I'm doing now is Waqf. No, that is not enough. So there's legal structures which have to be followed. So this is just my clarifications on
that explanation. Yeah, thank you so much for that clarification. It is quite informative. Jazakumullahu khairan jasa. The time is well spent. We have spent 1 hour 25 minutes, which is really worth it. If I must confess, is really worth it, because very strongly all of us have become more enlightened, better than where we are before the lecture started. So, Dr. Abdullahi Ishola, thank you so much. Jazakumullah khairan jasa on behalf of myself as the Amir of Jama'at Nasri Islam UK, and the Naib al-Amir, Imam Dawood Muhibuddin, and the members of Jama'at Nasri al-Islam, both in the UK, in Canada, in US. We say Jazakumullahu khairan jaza'a. We pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will continue to benefit you with beneficial knowledge. Thank you so much. At this point, we are going to call it a day. We have other series of lectures or presentations for this period of Ramadan. Every day we have a presentation. So inshallah, there's going to be another presentation tomorrow, which is going to be by 4 o'clock Nigerian time and 4 o'clock UK time as well. Day after tomorrow, the same thing is going to happen. And inshallah, we expect that we'll have more audience who will come in to benefit from these lectures. At this point, we say Jazakumullah khairan jaza'a to all the members of the audience. And we pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will accept our ibadat, we accept our Ramadan, we accept our salats. Thank you very much. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdik. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta wa nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayh. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم نشرح لك صدرك ووضعنا عنك وزرك الذي أنقض ظهرك ورفعنا لك ذكرك فإن مع العسر يسرا إن مع العسر يسرا وإذا فرجت فانصب وإلى ربك فارغب. Thank you so much. Jazakumullah khairan jaza'a. Inshallah, we'll meet tomorrow again. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.